Shankar, we are live on YouTube, Facebook, webinar, all, no?
Yes, sir. Streaming
Yeah.
started.
Thank you. Mr. Balraman, can you start? It's 6 o'clock now.
Please start. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to each one of you for another edition of most awaited Ponch Veteran Leaders Speak series. I think since the time we started the Ponch Veteran Leaders Speak series, there's so much of excitement among the people. They are keenly looking forward to every evening. As I mentioned to you earlier, we only know Saturday Night Fever for a dance, but today people are keenly waiting for the Saturday evening to listen to the Ponch veterans from all over the world sharing their insight. It's fantastic. And before I call upon the distinguished speaker for this evening to speak on another important theme, let me briefly tell you what's happening in MMA next few days, including the Ponch Veteran Leaders Speak series. I urge upon you to please note down so that if you have missed it in your inbox, so that you block your diary. Now, tomorrow, that's on Monday, 10th of August, we have again an outstanding speaker. Arun Maira is a thought leader, author, former planning commission member, head of Boston Consulting earlier. He's going to talk to us on COVID and the new normal in governance. It's happening on 10th. Then on the 12th, we have on talk on innovation by Rekha Shetty. On the 13th, again, we have an outstanding seminar we are organizing for the women, which is Innovate, the seminar on the women, which is on the occasion of Independence Day. 2020, marching ahead the next new normal, where Viswanathan Anand, former world champion chess, has agreed to come and speak to the women. And besides that, we have got some outstanding speaker speaking to us over 2 sessions. Please log in at our website to know more details about the event on the 13th. 14th, we have, again, we are indeed proud to announce the launch of operational excellence towards business excellence. 24 weeks workshop masterclass along with the Ponch veterans. This is getting launched on the 14th. The course will come in at the end of the month, and we have the privilege of Mr. Balraman, former managing director and Ponch veteran. He is going to be inaugurating the course. Please do log in. This is happening at 11 o'clock, and we also have a high power-packed panel discussion on the theme. This is happening on the 14th. Please do log in. And on the 17th, we have again not to be missed event. Post-pandemic world and India, you all know Mr. Gurumurthy, chartered accountant, columnist, political, economic analyst, and also RBI member, and also editor to Club. He's going to be talking to us on the 17th. Then on the 18th, again, another Ponch veteran, Mr. Atul Vora, is going to be talking to another important purposeful leadership. Then on the 19th August, we have Pradeep Philippe, the current DGP, CBCID. He's talking on Philippism on 333 Maxim. They got some outstanding panelists who are going to be moderated by Barkadat. This is happening on the 19th. Then 22nd, again, we have a distinguished speaker, Mr. Shyam Sundar, will be talking to us what prevents you from building wealth by investing in equity markets. Then on the 26th, we have another event by Umesh. Then on the 28th, again, we have a panel discussion, government, company, NGO partnership in the age of COVID. We have a very high-profile panel with Ari Narayanan, Shyam C. Raman, Aruna Subramaniam, and moderated by Anuvaza. Then on 29th, again, Ponch veteran, Mr. M.S. Narayanan is going to be talking to us from Sydney, Australia. This is what is happening. Now we are ready for the evening. This evening, we already have quite a number of people logged in. Once again, very warm welcome to all the Ponch veterans who are logged in on Zoom, and also all the viewers watching this program live on our MMA webcast, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also our live MMA radio, those who are listening audio. So I can assure you, you're going to have a fascinating evening for next 1.5 hours. Now the topic for this evening, which is exactly we are all looking forward, consumer and the society centricity, a few others, and to get there. And we have one of the outstanding speakers, Mr. Kannan, business mentor, former MD of Adidas, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia. And to introduce the speaker, introduce the subject into the theme, let me have the privilege of call upon my mentor, well-wisher of MMA, Mr. Balraman. I think I must introduce Balraman. Actually, it doesn't really need introduction to this August gathering, but it's always a privilege, which I don't miss it. Mr. Balraman is I am Ahmedabad, Hindustan Lever. He was the MD of Ponch with a stint in Polaris Group. He is passionate about management development, was an energetic president of MMA. He was the only president who continuously held it assignment for over 2 years, speaker in several management seminars, conferences, devoted to human resource development, created brand HR software, and many more, and enjoys coaching, mentoring leaders, helping build brands, consults on marketing through Boardroom Advantage. A mission inspires leadership development. And one example of his building the brands and taking it next level is MMA. We are all there to see and watch how we have grown over a period. A very warm welcome to Mr. Balraman. May I now request you to introduce the speaker and the theme. Over to Mr. Balraman.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Group Captain.
Well, Mr. Kannan has already been very nicely introduced by Group Captain Vijay Kumar. Kannan is unusual in the sense that he worked in India, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, all on consumer marketing. Kannan, what are your top line recall about consumers in these different countries?
I mean, I think all experiences outside India is a fascinating learning journey. My first stint was in Singapore. Very evolved consumers, a very small market. Uh, Interestingly, Adidas Singapore is bigger than Adidas in India in terms of business. When I moved from India to this thing, it's hardly 4 million consumers, but clearly they had the power to purchase, and they also are very, very well traveled. So very evolved consumer from that standpoint, has access to everything that the world has to offer. And they're also very, very widely traveled. uh, Thailand, very different kind of a this thing. Thailand, I don't know if many of you know, actually the language is based on Sanskrit. So a lot of the early part of Thai language, both Rama and I, we learned Thai. Thais like you to speak in Thai if possible. And when two Thais talk among themselves, they won't even use a single English word, even though they probably both studied outside the country. So amazingly proud of their background. They, again, along with, I think, Japan, they think that they are the ones that have never been colonized, right? So Indonesia, totally different market. Again, somewhere in between, a lot of wealth overall, but lots of inequities in distribution of wealth. So there's a large set of consumers who consume like the developed world, and of course, a large set of consumers who didn't have access to a lot of things. So uh, very different experiences. Of course, I had a chance to be in the other parts of Southeast Asia as well, but these are the markets I spent most of my time in.
Yeah, and most interestingly, you went from cosmetics to shoes to, retailing mobile phones. We are most eager to listen to you, Kannan. I have listened to your brief earlier, and I know you're posing very, very challenging questions to the audience. So I look forward to a very interesting session with a lot of debates.
Yeah,
So,
from the face to shoes, and then outside the body with mobile phones and lots of different kinds of experiences. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Balram, for inviting me to, and thank you, Group Captain Vijay Kumar. It's indeed a pleasure to talk to the people. I think it's also important. I think, like Group Captain said, I mean, Saturday evening prime time, 6 to 7:30. I want to really thank all of you in the audience for taking time from the prime time to be part of it. Hopefully,
Kannan, sorry to interrupt. I think you should also introduce the three coordinating
I will.
panel.
Yeah, I will. I will. Yeah. So, and yes, we will also have three other people who will join me later in the conversation. I'll give you an overview of what we will do. And Deepika Warrior from Diageo, she's the CMO of Diageo, was joining in. And then you already, probably some of you who joined in early, got to see Vivek and Sham. These are Ponds veterans, and I'll briefly introduce them again closer to when I call them on to talk as well. Vivek has been in Ponds and then Levers and uh, Godrej, Tatas, and of course Vodafone in India and South Africa. And Sham, again, large roles in Ponds and Hindustan Lever. And then, of course, a very, very successful wealth manager. So some of you may want to connect with him separately on this whole
You
topic.
want to improve your wealth.
Huh? Want to improve their wealth, make up their lost wealth during this crash, whatever their objectives. Yeah, make more, make up for the losses, whatever it is. Yeah. But and before I anyway talk about the topic and I share that, I also want to acknowledge a couple of people who've taken a look at my presentation and gave me feedback. Ajay Chawla, who's my classmate from IIM Calcutta and CEO of Tanishq. Of course, Vivek had a chance to take a look and give me some feedback as well. And I did reach out to Rama, my wife, who is a successful corporate person in her own right, did some large regional roles in British Petroleum across Southeast Asia. And she's actually a director in a listed company in India as well. And she's a master certified coach and does a few other things. I mean, I can't list everything that she does. She does a lot of things. Okay, today my topic is consumer and society centricity and a few other ands. So you'll see a lot of focus on this ands, and so what I'll do is I'll roughly take, it's about 6:10 right now, I'll roughly take about 35 to 40 minutes to talk about my points. And then what I'll do is I'll invite Deepika, Vivek and Shyam to join me in a conversation. They're of course free to disagree with my views or build on whatever I had to say over the 35, 40 minutes. And of course, if they had any clarifying questions, they can. And then subsequently, we will throw the conversation open to the audience. I'm looking forward to having some questions from the audience as well. So we will wind up by 7:30, yeah, 7:30 or a little earlier, depending on how it goes. But that's the time frame, about 35 to 40 minutes from me, and then a 15 to 20 minute conversation with the other three, and then 15 minutes for the rest of the audience. So I need to start with my background to give you context, right? So post MBA from IIM Calcutta, I joined Unilever in India. I also did my summer training with Ponds and had a pre-placement offer, and Unilever was nice enough to post me back to Ponds. And I say nice enough because Ponds is a fabulous place. I got a lot of responsibilities very, very early. I think the learning was immense, both from the empowerment that Ponds leadership gave to its team, and especially youngsters like me who joined fresh out of college, and of course the caliber of people that you get to interact with in Ponds. I mean, I wasn't a topper, but Ponds used to recruit a lot of toppers from IITs and IIMs, and so it was really great fun. And these were lovely people as well, lovely human beings. So, I mean, even though I spent only about 4 years at Ponds and another year at Levers, I think that still is a very, very important part of my growth, and still have very fond memories of that part. That's the first piece. And I learned my brands and consumers piece being a brand manager, assistant brand manager for the Vaseline brands, which I really love flaunting. And I also worked a little bit on the Ponds side of the business. And then, of course, I went to Levers for about a year to do sales there. 5 years with the Unilever Group, and I decided I want to do something different. And I got an opportunity to join Adidas as head of sales and marketing. So very early in 1996. In fact, I joined Adidas in India even before the company had permission to do business. For about 2-3 months, virtually I was working for the MD designate for the company. And then spent 14 years with Adidas Group in India and across Southeast Asia. So that was a terrific building on the learnings from the FMCG business and going into the exciting sporting and fashion side of the business, because Adidas, while it's a sports brand, has a significant amount of fashion part of the business as well. I think along maybe mid 1999, as I was doing marketing and sales for Adidas in India, I also got a chance to informally run the business in India. That's when I really thought, okay, this is actually more fun than just being a brand marketer, because as a managing director or as a general manager, you get a chance to actually put all the pieces together much better than you can influence as a marketing person. And then I, of course, went on formally to become managing director for Adidas in Singapore in end of 2000. And then subsequently was managing director for Adidas in Thailand and Indonesia. I also got to do some roles in retail and strategy across Southeast Asia for Adidas. And then almost after 14 years with Adidas and 10 years outside the country, Rama and I, my wife, we decided to move back to India and do something different in India. I wanted something different. She wanted something different. I like to believe that I like a lot of change, but Rama reminds me that I'm not much of a change person. I think, Mr. Balram, you mentioned about how wives put you in the right places. I recall that conversation, and Rama does that fabulously for me as well. I think I'm all for change, but she thinks I need 2 days advance notice to decide to add a breakfast in Malleswaram, on the way from home to Cubbon Park. And her idea of change for me is I should be able to drive to Chennai on the way from home to Cubbon Park or on the way back. Of course, her parents live in Chennai. That's an additional incentive. So I think, this is where one of the things that I realize is that we all believe and have some labels, but yeah, we're all good in some parts, and then we may not necessarily be the same across every aspect of our life. Then, of course, it was Nokia. Nokia, again, a very, very exciting business. Mobile phones. If there's one thing that consumers can't live without, I would say it's probably mobile phones. If you threaten to take away people's mobile phones or smartphones more specifically, I think most people feel like they've been cut off. So to summarize, and of course, after that, now in the last 5 years, I did dabble in a startup, closed that, work with a few NGOs, advised mentors and startups in social entrepreneurship. And then Rama, my wife, and I, we teach a course on social entrepreneurship at a school called Indian School of Development Management. So to sum up, to give you a background, I worked on brands Vaseline, Adidas, and Nokia, general manager in Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, strategy and retail across Southeast Asia, retail in Nokia, India, and now, of course, do multiple things. And I've got them listed here. So what I'll do now is move on to the topic of, I said we'll talk about consumer centricity and society centricity. I'll start with consumer centricity first. I don't know how many of you were in the last week's talk by Professor Rajiv Batra from Ross School of Management. He talked about brand love and brand coolness, right? That's a fascinating piece of research. I think for every marketeer, that's like the holy grail, to be able to be seen as cool by your consumers and to be loved by your brand. Of course, not always possible for most categories. I think I was lucky to be part of categories like mobile phones and Adidas, and of course, even skincare is a very high involvement piece, but that was the early part. But a lot more experiences on Adidas. I want to make a distinction between consumers and customers. I'll keep using the word customer. When I say customer, I'm referring to the intermediaries, the distributors and retailers. Very important piece of the puzzle, but still not the same as the consumers who are actually buying and using the product. So I refer to the end users as consumers and the intermediaries as customers. Many companies confuse actually when they say customer centric or consumer centric. They're probably actually really more customer centric. They look to what their distributors and dealers want. And in many cases, because of that, they're not able to have the same connection that I believe we should have with consumers. It was the same case with Adidas in the early days, very, very consumer centric, lost its way to in the 80s to some extent because they were not as sufficiently consumer centric, focusing on customers. But then in the 90s, again, came back and talked about consumer focused and customer aware. So the hierarchy gets established clearly that it's always consumers first, but that doesn't mean we'll ignore the customers. We'll still do what is right for the customers. But if we had to prioritize, it'll always be consumers first. Brands like Nike and Apple, again, Professor Batra talked about it. I mean, if there is a desire for any brand manager to be handling brands like that, it would be brands like Nike. And they're ruthlessly, I would say, I would use the word ruthlessly focused on the consumers. And you don't mess around as a customer with brands like Nike or Apple. You know very clearly that your consumers want. So you have to present the best of the brands, even if you're a retailer or a distributor or a telecom operator for these brands. And if they have to make a compromise with other brands, they'll obviously play around with the smaller brands. And that's what used to happen with Adidas in some parts of the world when it was not as strong as Nike. So Nike would be the best of Nike would be presented by the customers. And then you would have the middle from Adidas and the Reeboks and the Pumas at the lower end. So being consumer centric is about actually what the consumers experience. It's not what is there in the strategy document. It's not even what you communicate through your television commercials or social media or whatever else that you might be. And Vivek and I were chatting about this. You know, for us in Adidas, for example, or Nokia, it was that first point of contact. I don't want to call it the last mile distribution. That's a distribution thing. But if you think from the consumer standpoint, the first point of contact for the consumer with the brand is at the retail store. It could be in your own exclusive store if you're really lucky. It could be in a multi-brand store where they're also getting a chance to shop for other brands. Or in some cases, they could just be talking to somebody from the call center. And these are not, if these are not the people who are as motivated about the brand as we are, or as brand managers and as leaders running these businesses, it's not. You ask any CEO, he or she will say, oh, I'm the point of contact for the consumer. It's all about consumer centricity or customer centricity. But most consumers don't get a chance to meet the CEOs, right? They interact with the people on retail. And these are all people who are well-meaning, but there's a very high level of staff turnover there. In some cases, it could almost be 100% staff turnover, which means that they barely last about 6 months. So a lot of work needs to be done operationally to make sure that that first point of contact is absolutely right. Unfortunately, again, we talk about lots of consumers or consumer-centric brands talk about brand loyalty, and they run whole kinds of programs to try and get consumers into the brand and put in lots of restrictions and tie them up, thinking that we will create brand loyalty. But most often, I think my expectation would be that brands need to be loyal to its consumers. So it actually needs to make sure that it understands consumers, deliver what consumers want. And of course, once you're able to do that, you actually get a chance to lead the consumer in the direction that you would like to take them. Because at the end of the day, the objective is better brand differentiation for the brand, right? So you need to be in a situation to get them onto the brand by doing the right thing, and then potentially leading the brand to more right things, which is in sync with the brand, and then you get that. So the hierarchy to me is always clear: consumers, customers, maybe even employees after that, and then finally the company. Because if you do take care of your consumers and customers and employees well, then there is whatever you want, whether it's sales or profitability or anything else that you want. Having said that, I mean, I think despite the best intentions, sometimes mistakes do happen, right? So you could have the best products, you could have the best everything, but still something or the other goes wrong. And I think it's very, very important to see how you handle when mistakes happen. And I think that's a very important step or a way to understand how consumer-centric the companies really are. I mean, in today's context, you could be calling a company and then you could be waiting for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes sometimes to get to the call center person because they're trying to optimize what is right for the company, not doing what is right. But never happens with Amazon. Anytime I've called, less than a minute, somebody picks up, and then they're empowered to take actions to suit what is right for the consumers. I'll give you an example, not of Amazon, but a different company, and I won't name it. The idea is not to embarrass the company or this. My nephew moved in with us just at the beginning of COVID. He was doing his 12th at Coimbatore and moved in with us. He's an aspiring game designer. He has a fancy laptop. And then a day after he lands up at home, his charger conks off. So he was cool about it, but I was like panicking because for me, devices are very important. I'm like thinking, what is he thinking? He's come home, and I tried for about a couple of hours to get to the service center of the company and then the sales center of the company to see if I could even buy a replacement. Then went online to Indian sites to see if I could buy a new piece. Then went to international sites, then decided not a smart thing to do during COVID. You never know when it's going to come. And then finally I realized, okay, we'll do the Indian way of fixing it. I called a friend, one of my batchmates from IIM Calcutta, who knew the MD of this company. And then lo and behold, within 24 hours, I get a replacement for that laptop charger. But ideally, that should not have been my experience. Ideally, even if it took me 48 hours or 72 hours to get a replacement, if I was able to get it from the call center without going through these steps of talking to the CEO or talking to a friend who knows the CEO, and I think that's what about. I'm assuming maybe this was a case of initial problems during the COVID times. I hope, and that's one of the reasons also I don't want to name the company because, but I wish it was a different kind of an experience. I share a different experience with Adidas in Singapore. Those days I used to visit one store every day, whether it's my own store or my competitor's store or a multi-brand store. And of course, being vegetarian in Singapore, I also need to go to different places to make sure I've got getting my vegetarian food. So that's one of the additional reasons I did that. And one day I was in one of my stores and was talking to my staff, and a consumer came to the store and she said, hey, here is a problem I have with this particular shoe. And the store manager involuntarily said, oh, is that so? I mean, this has never happened to anyone else. And I was really taken aback because maybe the store manager is trying to do what is right for the company by trying to protect the company and say, oh, this is the first time it's happening. But when you say that, you're probably insinuating that this consumer was faking the mistake or maybe it's not real. So I immediately introduced myself, apologized, and said, we'll quickly get back. And then went back, and within a few days, we completely changed our policy about how we handle. The first thing you do is acknowledge that there is a problem, even if it's not a genuine problem, and then find ways to quickly fix. And then we changed some of the internal process to make sure that we sorted the problem. And we actually acknowledged and gave them something extra, because for every consumer who comes back to complain about a problem that you have, you probably have lost 5 or 10, or who knows how many other people who are going around bad-mouthing the brand to other people. So it's really critical that you handle, when problems happen. The other point I wanted to highlight is, Professor Batra talked about brand love and brand coolness. These are absolutely desirable and required, I think, for brands to really aspire to and even achieve. Unfortunately, you can't be everything to everybody, right? When you have the whole set of consumers ahead of you, you have to pick and choose the kind of consumers that connect with your brand, that have the potential to relate better to your brand than somebody else. I think one of the things in my experience that I figured, which Professor Batra didn't talk about, was for every brand that is loved, there's a whole bunch of consumers who don't relate to the brand at all. I've had I'm a fan of. I used to be a fan of Apple, then came out of Apple. I'm back with Apple, and I have a few friends who keep constantly ribbing me about my love for Apple, and they are like, my Android can do this and that and that and that. But the fact is, yes, I think there will be a set of consumers who love Android, and there will be a set of consumers who love Apple. But it's unlikely that. So, as a brand manager or as a business manager, you need to be comfortable with the idea that for every group that really loves you, you actually end up possibly having a set of people who may not love you, or who may even hate you and can't relate to you. I think that's very important to recognize. So in some sense, it's not very inclusive. You will be a wishy-washy brand if you're trying to do everything to everybody. A few brands, I think, manage to achieve that capability, but they're not probably as differentiated, and the categories are probably not as this thing. I'm open to being challenged on that piece. Another piece about Apple, for example, most often you will never find Apple products discounted in the market. And you can see it as poor consumer. This thing, ideally it should be available for a discount or whatever. But I think as a consumer, I think it's wonderful if you don't have to run around to 10 shops to see where is the lowest price that you can get that product. So in some ways, some of the things that you do to build the brand may not necessarily be something that many others like. So before I go further into it, I'll talk a little bit about my experience with Adidas and a little bit of what I did. I'm going to indulge a little bit. I think I spent so much time on Adidas. I'm going to show you the ad that we made. So, again, Adidas used to have 60% of all athletes who were participating in Olympics at one stage, and NBA and so on. And then Nike came and completely changed the game. What did they do? They would just hire or sign up with the top runner, the top 100 meters winner, basically. If you think about any Olympics, the one event that you probably remember is who won the 100 meters, right? And similarly, if you're watching thousands of NBA games or hundreds of NBA games, you probably have 2 or 3 special people that you feel connected with. And Nike changed that game. And when I was with Adidas in India, I got a little lucky. Reebok and Nike were ahead of us. And they were these fresh new US brands. Most Indians who came back from the US came back with a Nike or a Reebok, not with an Adidas. We were number 2 globally, but that didn't matter to the consumers. So we were looking at what do we do. So when I started, I had Ramesh Krishnan, the tennis star, to launch the brand. Then we were lucky. We signed up Leander Paes and Mahesh Bhupati. They were winning some fantastic Grand Slams between them. But everybody was like, where is the cricketer? Where is the cricketer? And so we got lucky, and then I got Sachin. And in fact, when we launched Sachin with Adidas, one of the reporters in Hindi reported it as I'm not saying it exactly, but something to this effect. Pura Indian team ke samne Adidas ne Sachin ko khada kar diya. So the whole team was with the competition, but Adidas put Sachin in front of that competition to stand out. And I think that's the kind of stuff that is. And that's what makes brands work. It's not about how many thousands of athletes you have. You do have a few more athletes. You don't want to be stuck with one brand ambassador. You do have a little bit of hedging. But then, of course, we went on to build a fantastic brand communication with, okay, now I need to move the slide. Yeah, I'm going to show the ad that we made with Sachin. But before that, I'll briefly talk about, I actually found my old media communication to the media when we launched that. The brief to the agency, Arkiswamy BBDO, was, and to the director Ram Madhwani, who is making some fantastic films now, feature films, was to extol Sachin's ability to transform the game, his mastery over the game. It must also mirror the emotions of the fans, their involvement with the game, and their relationship with Sachin. And finally, also represent the way they respond when Sachin goes and achieves the task at hand. through these emotions, we would like to reflect our commitment to the game, Adidas's commitment to the game of cricket and to sport itself, and most importantly, the value we attach to our star symbol, Sachin Tendulkar. This was made in February 1998, so almost 21 years ago. And I'm going to play that now. Can you see it? Sorry. Yeah. So Sachin and the ad and everything that we did made some waves in the country. And by 2000, we had become the #1 brand in terms of brand preference. In terms of sales, we were still behind Reebok. Reebok is selling a lot more. So from consumer centricity, I wanted to move on to the next topic and a few other ends that I talked about. Typically, as a managing director, and I mean, even as a brand manager, you end up having some polarities that you worry about. But as a brand, as a marketing, as a managing director, you get a chance to actually make the brand and the business more consumer centric. But at the same time, you realize that there are lots of other things that you also need to do. And sometimes they look like they're contradictory. If I focus on this too much, what happens? If I don't focus on the other, what happens? So the question is, like we talked about consumer and customer. It is consumer and customer, but you also have that hierarchy in terms of what you want to do. Do you focus on the short term? Do you want to focus on the long term? And then somewhere along the way, I realized that I think it was important for me to pick a few of these seemingly contradictory things and do both sides well. So it's not about a balance of a lower level of balance of if you want to take work and life and say, you can balance it at a very lower level, or you can talk about a dynamic equilibrium and push one up and pull the other and do that. What I'm talking about is an intense focus on both sides of this thing. And when I give you examples, I'm sure you can relate to some of that when it comes to. But managing polarities is a very, very complex business. And I realized it as I was trying to do it, especially in Adidas Singapore. I think I saw some of my colleagues from Adidas Singapore join on the call. I'm sure the first 6-8 months, they're wondering, like, does this guy really know what he's talking about? Does he really have the ability to deliver what he's talking about? Because some of these are contradictory. You want to move with a vision of the long term, but if you don't deliver on the short term to convince people that we are on the right path, there is no buy-in or confidence that the long term is going to happen. It's only, so how do you manage these polarities of, and I remember this conversation with my boss, and I'll talk about it, jump into that. Growth and profitability, standard polarity. I think almost everybody intuitively understands this. Of course, if you grow, your profitability can improve. But until you grow to a certain size, you need to invest behind the business. You need to invest into the brand, right? Especially if you want to invest into the business through innovations and brand marketing and so on and so forth, you need a hell of a lot of investments. In fact, I remember I had this conversation with my boss in Hong Kong when we were discussing my targets for 2001. So I said, like, I mean, how do you expect me to grow the business and grow profitability? Give me some time to clean up the business and get some size, and then I think it's a fair expectation that you can expect me to improve profitability. And even I cheekily told him, like, did the previous MDs manage the business so badly that, you think there's an opportunity for me to do both sides of the equation? That well, he said, like, kind of no argument, like, buzz off, you know. And those are the kind of contradictions that you had to manage. And it is actually possible once you've been pushed to the corner and say, no, you have to grow. Because I think what you're growing in is one set of the business, and what you're weeding out is a different part of the business. Because at any point in time, there are certain parts of the business which have the potential for the future. And in fact, we have to create that potential for the future. And if you don't do that, your growth potential for the future is kind of limited. And at the same time, it's important to figure out what are the lines of businesses which are degrowing or not necessarily relevant anymore. And when I was having this conversation with Vivek, he had a very nice way of putting it. He's saying leaders, they need to be a visionary and a farmer. Farmer weeding out unprofitable lines at every point in time. And doing something like that made it possible for me to, manage this. We were 1/3 of Nike in 2000. By 2005, we tripled the business in about 5 years' time, and we had overtaken Nike to be the #1 brand. Needed a whole lot of investments. Some of them, of course, came from global, but some of that investment we had to generate internally by weeding out internal lines. I mean, customers who are not paying us on time. I mean, you unlock value for the business by managing your receivable, by managing your inventory, by managing some low margin businesses, taking price hikes in some parts of the business. So I think probably this is intuitively common in most businesses. I doubt if today any business except startups focus, for the first, 5 years, 10 years only on growth. Maybe Amazon had that luxury of convincing. Jeff Bezos managed to convince his investors that it's okay to deliver profitability after 10 years, but most existing running businesses don't get that luxury. So maybe this is something that I'll give you another example, but maybe we'll jump in the interest of time. We're already 30 minutes into my conversation. I try and wrap up the other points in the next 15, 20 minutes. We had to do something similar with Nokia. When I joined Nokia in India, we had about 800 stores across different kinds of locations. In 3 years, we had to shut down almost 500 stores. Some of them, of course, we would have liked to keep them, but the franchisees decided to quit on us because they were not profitable with the brand. We had to open 200 new locations because these were locations where consumers were shopping and we didn't have a brand presence in there. And then we had to manage that entire set of stores, 500 to 800 stores that I talked about, in terms of what was the objective of those stores, and make sure that we were focused on sales and distribution in Nokia. We were largely selling the cheap mobile phones, 1,000 rupees and thereabouts. It was all about sales and distribution game. The further you got to the consumer in the rural markets, you got an extra sale. But by the time I joined, the market had totally changed towards smartphones. It was all about consumer experiences. Consumers wanted to see live devices. We would have dummies to show, to tell them what it looked like and how much it weighed, but you couldn't really experience what it was like. And if you ask the retailer, obviously he's not going to open his phone and show it to you because he can't sell it to a consumer after that. So we had to do a lot of that, but we had to do that by weeding out a lot of unprofitable stores, poor locations, renovations, and so on. From that, I'll move to the next one, which is about change and continuity. In some ways, it's probably linked as well, right? There's always a confusion about change. People say, why change when a iron broke, right? If it's doing well, why do you want to mess around with it? What's the chance that whatever change you want to bring about is work? And there's a lot of resistance. And there's a lot of resistance not because people want to resist, because some cases, people genuinely have a fear as to where is it's going to get us, right? So there's a lot of change management that's important too. And in some ways I talked about uh, earlier is relevant. If you're talking about a change from A to B, you need to convince them along the way in terms of steps, achieve them, and then prove to them how it is right. Some people will get onto the bandwagon immediately, but quite a few people keep resisting. And of course, most of them are more willing to change when things are in a mess. But is that the best time to change? I mean, in my mind, the best time to change is when things are going well. But again, to manage that, you don't have to change the entire business, hopefully. If you manage change on a regular basis, you can manage the change on part of the business without risking the whole of the business. Whereas if you delayed that over a period of time, then you have to apply that change in the entire business, and that's a lot more uh, dangerous for the organization and a lot more fearful for the team. And then to get that buy-in is not it's the same for brands and businesses. Hopefully, Vivek will talk about it when we talk about the Dreamflower Tal change, right? In the 90s, huge change for the brand. I'll share a bit of an experience on Adidas. In the 90s when I joined, the mid 90s when I joined, you see the Adidas logo, two logos, the blue one with the leaf design. It's actually a cutout world, and it's called the Originals logo at that time. And that was beginning to become a little jaded, and consumers didn't associate strong performance with that brand. So Adidas decided to come up with the performance logo, which is the one on the top of the screen. There was a huge amount of fear, and the biggest fear was actually from our home country, Germany, because they were always used to this old logo, and they thought like, we're going to kill this brand if we move from that to a lot of newcomers like us, like me, who came into the brand, thought this was absolutely essential. And luckily for the company, we went on to actually launch that. And to build further, actually, we built a whole huge heritage business and a casual business using the lower logo, the trefoil logo. And both these lines took off in a big way. I'm just imagining what would life have been if we had not made that change at that particular point in time, because clearly the brand was getting jaded. And if we didn't make that change, we would have probably been dead. You don't get too many chances if you don't change fast enough. My other story with Nokia, unfortunately, not a very positive one. Again, you can see these Nokia Lumia phones that I've got placed. The one on top is that beautiful Nokia Lumia 920 with the 41 megapixel camera. This was in 2012, I think, if I recall that, 8 years. Even today, I think right now there's some camera, some smartphone with a camera which is 41 megapixel or 42 megapixel. Beautiful new devices with Windows OS. Unfortunately, the whole organization was tuned to and continued to think that the market was around mobile phones. Very low confidence in smartphones and very low. I'm not talking about the Nokia Symbian phones, which were not a great bunch of phones. But once we got the Lumia range, we had some outstanding products. Still a long way to convince the consumer that we were on the path, but we had a chance to get onto that bandwagon. Internally, many people in the organization would keep talking about 85% of the volumes come from below 1,000 rupees, but the 15% volume was actually already 35% value for the smartphones. And that was growing at 70%, whereas the mobile phones was degrowing by 7%. I mean, some of you who know what happened in Levers, they separated the personal products business from the detergents business so that they could invest in the growth of this future personal products business. And actually, when Ponds was merged, it was actually combined together and formed into two lines so that both Ponds brands and Levers brands would be focused upon. We could have done probably something similar in the Nokia case, where there was a focus both on mobile phones and smartphones. I think the resistance to change, to focus sufficiently enough, I think cost us. In fact, a few of us were convinced and we pushed the organization. We almost recovered 300 crores of business in 3 months with 3 models, but that wasn't enough. The opportunity was much, much bigger, and we could have done a lot more. The next contradiction or the polarity that I'll talk about is alignment and diversity, right? Alignment, we all know, is very, very, very important. For an organization to move forward, the more aligned the entire organization, definitely the leadership team, it's easier too. And we also know birds of the same feather flock together, right? Unfortunately, sometimes in the interest of alignment, I think organizations hire people who are more like themselves. And I've had a few examples of leaders who are more hiring people like themselves. And if they hired for diversity because diversity was fashionable, it was more on gender and race and religion or education or whatever. But what I'm really talking about is diversity of thought and experiences. And I think based on my experience on innovations and what we could do, it's really diversity which brings that ability into organization to look at the whole problem or the solution from multiple dimensions. If your entire experience has been within the industry and you've been used to doing things in the same way, look at most industries that have been decimated by competition. And that competition has always come from outside because they don't have any respect for the existing industry. Take Kodak and the film business, competition from digital, competition within digital. Today you have for SLRs with mirrorless cameras and so on. Take mobile phones, Motorola, Samsung, Ericsson, Nokia. The only brand which managed to transition well was Samsung because they were also producing some of the components and they were able to evolve sufficiently. Apple had no respect for whatever the existing brands were doing, and neither did Google with its Android software, right? So to me, I think alignment is important, but diversity is probably as important or more important because it's diversity which brings that. But to manage diversity is not easy. I mean, to get the whole organization aligned with diverse set of people is not that easy. So one way of looking for alignment is alignment for purpose. In many companies, I think it's possible to. In Adidas, we were not that very clear about our purpose. So we used to take or at least I took the easier way out in Adidas, Singapore and Thailand, Indonesia, hiring for people who are interested in sports. If I got lucky, I would also hire people who were already fans of the brand Adidas. But when we are one-third of Nike, obviously you had to hire a few people from competition. But in some ways, actually hiring from competition is also good because we had a better sense of what our competitors were doing. Unfortunately, I couldn't say the same thing about Nokia India. A lot of the leaders and a lot of the team was built on Nokia, thought very highly of Nokia, didn't understand what the capabilities of the competition was and virtually poo-pooed competition when it came to. But we were getting our business kicked from all sides, but yet there was not sufficient realization that. So I think it's very, very important to make sure that we have diversity of thought and experiences and, break out of this group think. And I think organizations, and again, wonderful starting place in Ponds was you could disagree as long as you did that pleasantly and in the right way. You could disagree, and you got some terrific experiences very early. So you also got a chance to learn about it. And then I'll move into the next point, which is all about learning and contribution. Right? I remember once my boss asked me to move from Singapore it was March 2004, I think. He said, Kannan, we need you in India, move back to India. I said, hey, I just moved out of India to get some international experience. He said, no, the company needs you, move back to India. I said, I built the business for 5 years in India. Not much has changed in the last 2-3 years. Why should I go back? He said, no, the company needs you. I think very right from the company standpoint. I did offer him a solution where I could run both India and Singapore, but he said, no, I need 200% of your time in India. I eventually chose to stay back in Singapore. Of course, there were some consequences for not doing what was right for the company at that point in time. So I strongly believe every individual should get a chance to learn something in the job. And I'm not talking about, training and development programs. It's not about reading a book or going to a course and learning things. It's not even having debates and discussions on what is right. I think experiential learning really comes when you do things. And I think organizations like Ponch realized that very, very early and gave a chance to actually experiment and experience. Of course, I'm sure if it was a very large experience that could break the company, I'm sure somebody would have come down strongly on. But as a brand manager, I could virtually develop the mix for Vaseline antiseptic cream and heel guard and stuff like that, which I don't think very many organizations allow you to do. So I think as individuals, I'd say there are great individuals, there are great companies, but really what is important is whether you fit in. I think I would urge you to think through this. I'm almost getting close to finishing, so I'd start requesting some of the people to start thinking. You now know the drift of where I'm going, right? What are the ands that you think you have faced in your own lives, in your own careers, in your own this thing, and how did you start sharing in the chat? I think it'll be good to get you all involved and not just listen to me. So I would say get a chance to do what is right, both from, so it's about 6:55, so I'll try and wrap up in the next 10 minutes. So where do we go? So I talked about consumer centricity, important, and I also talked about the possibility that consumer centric may not be inclusive, right? And I had a chance in the last 4 or 5 years to spend a fair amount of time in the social sector, understanding the challenges. I mean, a lot of people are struggling not because they are not intelligent, not because they're hardworking. It's just that they've gotten into situations because of where they were born or what their circumstances were. We've been lucky probably to be in the kind of positions that we are in. And sometimes being consumer centric is not very inclusive and we could be excluding people. And in many cases, by being totally intently consumer centric, you can actually be, strengthening current stereotypes. Because if I do what is the current groupthink in the market among the consumers, I know I can connect better with the consumers. But is that the right thing to do? Is that morally right? Is that even, and what we also need to recognize is a lot of the youngsters today, I mean, unlike probably my generation, our generation, if I can say that for most of us in that 40s and 50s and 60s, the younger generation, they've had all kinds of experiences. They've enjoyed some level of wealth and prosperity, and they see this inequality, and they are a lot more in terms of looking at the kinds of rights, whether it's climate rights, whether it's women's rights, children's rights, LGBT rights, and they're willing to vote with their wallets. They're willing to support brands that are in sync with them, and they're absolutely ruthless. And it's not about the kind of brand loyalty or consumer loyalty that we talked about in the past. They want you to perform every transaction, right? So if today I buy this and tomorrow I feel that you missed the opportunity to do something good, I stop buying. So there's a lot more experimentation, a lot more brand changes that consumers are going through. And I think it's absolutely important. And it's necessary for brands to become more this thing. Also at the individual level, I think it's worthwhile to start looking beyond the organization. Of course, there is CSR and things like that, but there are lots of fantastic organizations. And I talked about Vritti and Swasti that I spent some time with, doing some amazing work with small and marginal farmers in agriculture or healthcare for marginalized communities. And then I tried to look up what's happening out there. I didn't do a whole lot of research, but when I looked up, I could see that Tata Tea is doing a campaign called Jagore. I don't know how many of you seen that, but I thought I'll share the ad. I hope it's not just an advertising communication strategy, but really a genuine overall strategy for the brand. And they're doing a whole lot of activation around it. And I'll share that ad now.
Ma, why did you walk faster when that man teased you? Ma, why did you adjust your dupatta when that man was looking at you? Ma, why didn't grandma want you to work after marriage? Why didn't auntie say that skirts are bad for girls? So I can wear shorts at home but not outside? But why do we have to avoid dark lanes? Why does Bhaiya get to stay at his friend's place but not me? Appa, why do you get worried when Ma travels alone? Why does your uncle call you late? Why did those friends slow down and look at you? Why can't I get out? Why are they different musicals? Why can't you travel alone at Ma? Why did that man whistle at you? Why can't I wear what I want? Why didn't you say anything when man teased you?
Sorry, let me stop that. Go back to my presentation. Yeah. So again, a very, very powerful campaign. They also picked up a couple of other themes like voting and women's rights and gender violence and stuff like that. And if this is also layered with a whole lot of work on the ground, that's a powerful change. And that's a powerful change and an association for a brand where the differentiation is not that very easy from products. Yes, it is possible. And I think, again, Vivek was probably responsible for some work on Tata Gold in terms of differentiating, but you could have a cost that is, and that's the kind of things that I'm talking about. And you could not just do it at the brand level or the business level, you could also do it at the individual level. I'll end my presentation with a few takeaways. What I talked about: growth and profitability, change and continuity, alignment and diversity, learning and contribution, and then consumer and society centricity. And yesterday I was talking to a dear friend on the golf course, and I was telling him I'm talking to MMA on this topic, and he said, "Fascinating. I have a nice quote that you may want to use." And then, of course, I asked Google Mama to understand who it was. And then I realized I think it was 94, Jim Collins and Jerry Porras in Built to Last talked about builders of greatness reject the tyranny of the or and embrace the genius of and. I wish I'd known about this when I was working at that point in time, or even before I started working on my presentation. But it felt good that some strong brand management gurus have also been talking about it, and so there's more. So if you want to read more about it, take a look at it. There's lots of videos on that. So Q&A. So as per the format that we have, let me now introduce and invite Deepika Warrior, CMO of Diageo. She's also done a lot of work at Pepsi before that. Vivek Mathur, a Ponds veteran, and then went on to do some amazing work at Godrej, Tata, HLL, of course, before that, and then Vodafone. And then Shyam Adhyantya, I talked about Ponds and levers, and then, of course, a wealth manager who's making good money for himself and his investors. Can we have them on, please?
Can you close the screen, sir?
Yeah.
Share the screen, PowerPoint.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, give me a second. Okay, I'm stopping sharing. Are you able to get back now?
They're all there, sir. Thank you.
Board is ready. Vivek?
Yeah. Hi, Karan. Thanks for sharing your experiences and all the ands and the seeming polarities, which as a leader that you need to manage. Some of them are seeming contradictions: growth and profitability, managing change and continuity, short term and the long term. I really loved some of your examples. I think for us, back in the 90s and Pond's, the Dream Flower Talc change, the relaunch, and especially the move into plastics was a major change. And it was critical for us to ensure that we kept continuity with the brand as it was. The Coke debacle, the new Coke had just happened a few years back, and therefore we had to be extra careful. And I remember that when you're making these kind of changes, you need to be very clear with the consumer. For example, we had a specific question to consumers where we wanted to confirm that if we had the new Dream Flower Talc and we did not have the older one, would they still be comfortable with it? Even more importantly, and this is a question that a lot of marketers don't really ask consumers, is would they be willing to pay more? Because that really is a question of, does the consumer really commit to the change that you're making? I really liked your point on polarization in brand preference. To my mind, polarization is good. Polarization is critical to differentiation, but polarization also means that you will lose out on some customers and some customers will not like you. To my mind, trying to attract everybody, and especially trying to attract detractors or people who don't like you or who are not your customers, leads to copycat actions. It leads to a lot of Me Too stuff. And I see a lot of categories where you have multiple brands who over a period of time start looking like each other. This leads to commoditization. It leads to value erosion. At the end of the day, I think even if what you really need is you can even manage with a 10% volume share. If you have 10% really loyal, committed customers, they can give you 20% revenue share, and that in turn can give you 60-65% of the value share of the market. If you look at Apple, for example, their volume share rarely exceeds 15% in any quarter, but that still gives them upwards of 30% in terms of value share.
Yeah.
And I would say that they end up actually capturing 60 to 70% of the profit pool.
No, in fact, at one stage, they were estimated to be capturing about 130% of the profit pool, because there were a lot of others who were losing money, and the overall profit pool, they had 130% of the profit pool. It's possible to even have more than 100%.
More than 100%, yeah. So, and the fact of the matter is that in the chase for volume market share, often we lose out on the differentiation that we have, and we lose out on the absolute loyalty of our customers, and we become much more dilute as brands. I have a few other points, but I think to Deepika and Shyam.
Thanks, Vivek, for that.
Is Deepika around?
Yep, very much.
Hi, Deepika. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, sir. So I wanted to just start off by thanking Mr. Balram, Group Captain Vijay, and of course, Kannan, thank you so much for inviting me to listen in, and of course, add a point of view if required towards the tail end of your talk. I love some of the stuff that you said. The whole point on the fact that you do need to have brands that are loved by some, have detractors. I love the whole visionary and the farmer thing. Learning and contribution personally for me is a very powerful value, and I think, but I'd like to spend more time on the last point that you made on the, I think the genius of the and between consumer centricity and society, I would say centricity, because I've seen some examples of it both personally in my experience at PepsiCo, as well as I think recently had the privilege of being on the jury of the Brand Equity Marketing Awards. And this is very recent work. And we saw some lovely examples of brands which are able to, large brands which are able to do both. So let me just start off, by saying that as a marketer, and I think you gave the whole, the CEO, managing director perspective, but as a marketer, one is constantly juggling with the and, right? So there's always this focus on how do you balance the long term and the short term. And obviously you try and do it by having a long-term strategic vision, but clearly particularly in times like what we're going through of the, the amazing volatility that we're going through. You need to be ruthlessly focused on the short term, and the short term could be this week, today, not even the quarter or the month. But it's important to balance the two and not lose sight in focusing on the now of the longer term goal that you've set for your brands or your business. Similarly, I think the other challenge, which takes genius to manage, is the whole focus for marketers between the core and the more. So how do you kind of nurture the core, invest in the core where your right to succeed lies, and where the bulk of your business is, which are possibly your profit pools. But at the same time, how do you incubate and nurture spaces where probably consumers are heading, or where you're probably leading consumers? And I think you made the Apple example, which is great. So how do you manage that balance is also something that we think about. As a marketer, you're constantly tussling with sales. And I think that's, on the whole push and the pull. And again, if they're not seamlessly integrated and you're doing an or, you know that you're headed for disaster on brands. More recently, I think in the last 10 years or so, the whole juggle between, traditional media, the online and the offline, but I think, marketers, because they want to look intelligent and with the times, need to show a huge investment in online. But the reality is in countries like India, there are huge consumer pools and profit pools who still served very well with traditional media.
This is the problem of centralization and localized.
Localization.
Take some global decisions which are absolutely not relevant for the local market.
Correct. Even within a country, Kannan, to your point, the whole thing on regional and state and really micro versus having a national perspective. So how do you manage that? So many ands, and you do need to manage them. There is absolutely no or, and the way you do it is through prioritization, and of course a lot of communication. I think you mentioned that as well in the organization, and then of course being again the and of being consistent on one hand and being flexible and agile on the other. So coming back to the last point that you made on the whole societal versus, the consumer centricity, which I thought was a great point. So pulling back from a business point of view, and again, this is MMA, and of course, I would say one of the most iconic citizens of Madras, whom I've had the privilege to work with myself, and who's absolutely iconic is Indra Nooyi. And I think she, way back in 2006, brought the whole, the whole concept of performance with purpose to PepsiCo. And PepsiCo before that was hugely successful as an impulse snacks and foods business. And, we were all about, delivering for the quarter. There was, of course, the whole market share thing, focus on top line profitability. And I think Indra very quickly realized when she came in as CEO that, you needed, it was just not enough for us to make money and then take a little bit of that money and put it behind some purpose initiatives, which were relevant both to to all stakeholders. She realized that as a company, we needed to constantly balance performance with purpose. And I think she set out a great strategy, which is being implemented to the day, even with her successor, as she stepped down last year. And the simple four tenets of performance with purpose was continuing to deliver, financial goals, strong financial goals. And the stock really rose at her time in her time as CEO. But at the same time, also drive portfolio transformation. So what she did was she took the core and she ensured that we as a business were taking out the baddies from our so-called fun for you products, which was fat, salt, sugar, in a way that we were not compromising on taste for the consumers. The other end, at the same time,
health and taste.
Health and taste while growing the more nutritious parts of the portfolio. She, of course, created the entire strategy around environmental sustainability, whether it was water or plastic. And finally, the whole human sustainability, which was growing talent on the one hand, but also, as you mentioned, diversity and inclusion and growing communities, that we were serving as a business. So I remember one of the questions that she would always ask us when she did reviews with the India exec, when she came to India, was, tell me what value is a multinational adding to India? Why would they give us a license to operate? And I think that's a lens that she looked at, all our business. And it was powerful, immensely valuable for me. Coming back to some other examples, and I know I'm overshooting my time, and you can not come back to me later. But 2 or 3 examples that we saw while we were at the the awards, which we found absolutely powerful. And maybe I'll touch upon one. So this was Samsung, and since you spoke about phones, and what really impressed me was here's Samsung, a brand which goes to 100 million households, and I think they took on this whole purpose initiative where they said that they would bring in a technological inclusion for the underprivileged. And one of the entries that they had was an innovation that they'd done that they called Good Vibes. Now, essentially, what this was, and I don't know how many of the audience or you've heard this, but essentially it was an app. It's an app which is targeting the deaf blind. And they said this is such a small segment of society, which is completely, and with the advent of technology and smartphones and so on and so forth, the divide is just growing between these sections versus, the haves. All of us.
Microsoft also does some amazing work for the blind.
Yeah, and they created this app, which was a 2-way app where, this community could actually use, haptic sensors and, Morse code to actually send two-way signals. And, it was really powerful in terms of how they used it to kind of empower the sector.
Great that they're doing it, and it's a very small audience probably, but
but
right thing to do.
I think as a purpose, it's the right thing to do, and it just, it's the right signal to send.
And it also advances the technological development.
Absolutely. A couple of other examples that we saw was Unilever, of course, continuing with the whole hand wash initiative. This time they took it to Kumbh Mela, and they had this red stamp, which was all about washing your hands after urination and going to the toilet, which apparently only 1 in 3 Indians do. And the other one was a really powerful example that we saw from Lux, who actually were addressing breast cancer awareness, which is again a contradiction for a brand which is all about beauty, actually focusing on physical well-being and the intimate area of the shower. And they designed a soap with a visible lump in it. And it was all about women being encouraged to examine themselves. And in the shower, what was interesting is the soap lasts for 15 to 20 days, but what would remain is a lump while the soap would melt away.
Okay.
Really powerful examples of scale brands, trying to manage the and between doing their bit for society and the consumer, but as a result, growing brand equity and also performance.
Thanks, Deepika, for sharing that. Sham?
Yeah, Kannan, I have a question. That is, you talked about Nokia, which at one time owned the mobile market.
Yeah.
And at Sony at one time owned the Walkman and the mobile music market.
Yeah.
But is it that as organizations grow larger, the leaders tend towards product and functional focus and efficiencies, and they start losing the consumer focus?
I think, there are many books on why Nokia failed, and I'm sure I don't know all of it, but here is my take. For the audience, I don't know how many of you know the background of Nokia. 150, 170 years ago, Nokia was a company selling carbon black, paper, and other natural products. Finland had only that, nothing else.
Timber,
Right?
timber.
Yeah, timber, yeah. And 20 years ago, they completely shut all that and moved into telecom, right? And then 15 years later, struggled with the same business. And here is my take. I think in the first case, Nokia was the disruptor. So it had no respect to what was happening in telecom. It was freely doing what was right for the consumer or customer, whatever it took. And then I think there was a point in time when Nokia had taken a punt that there are 6 billion, 8 billion consumers in the world, and every consumer needs a phone. And the only way to reach the 6 billion, 8 billion was through a cheap mobile phone. We actually had some of the best technology innovations, smart screens, smartphones, everything was there. Of course, Symbian was a clunky software which didn't bring out the best that we could do. But I think the additional problem that Nokia, I think, had was that we were also into manufacturing phones. So 15 years later, when the market moved to smartphones, I think very few people realized that this was happening. And I can talk about my India experience. Very few leaders in India accepted that smartphones, it'll take years to come. Kannan, you're from the sports industry, Singapore, you have no clue. And I would challenge them and say, educate me. 85% of the volumes from below 1,000 rupee phones, but 15% of the volume gives 35% value, growing at 70%. Where is the future? How are we doing this and that? And that didn't come across. So I think, when you start defending your core of the business, I think your behavior is not in sync with what your consumers want. You start defending your business, whereas what you should be really defending is your relationship with your consumer. And if you do that well, and most organizations that fail are actually organizations that were super innovative just 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago. That's my take. Again, I'm sure there are many more.
Yeah, my observation is similar, that people start getting committed to product lines. They start committed to functional efficiencies. They find that whatever they have, the baggage they have, it is difficult to change. So they think that they need not change and don't leave the flexibility within the organization.
Yeah. And I think the other unfortunate situation is, I think it was largely geared to pushing boxes. The sales and marketing the sales and distribution machinery pushed boxes. Consumers wanted experience. Yeah, experience came from smartphones. Experience came from live devices in the stores. And I told you, we had dummies in the stores. I'm like, why would you show dummies of smartphones? Made sense if you're selling a basic phone to a rural consumer who's buying what it gets, and all you could do anyway was to make a call, and send SMSs. But with smartphones, it was a different story altogether.
Yeah, I think, Karan, I think that's a really powerful point that you make, because an organization, the best time for an organization to change, the irony is that the best time for an organization to change is when you're doing well.
Yeah.
But that's also the time that you're most committed to whatever has been working well for you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And to that extent, for Nokia, it became too little, too late by the time, and their credibility was already gone by the time they moved into very actively into smartphones.
Very, very dynamic business.
Yeah, I was on the board of Nokia along with KV Kamal.
So you probably have a inside look at it.
Yeah.
What's your take?
You see, in Finland, the problem was that they were too vested in Symbia. Yeah, they had a very large group within the company, very loyal to Symbia. And as you said, the consumer experience required to be changed. Consumers wanted smartphones. Symbian was not very amenable. iOS was, Android was. The choice of moving to Android was there for the Nokia, but the Nokia management dragged its feet. The chairman of Nokia, we spoke to him there, in Helsinki. He couldn't overcome his, you see, the problem is whatever works for you now is also your break for the change. It's like for Hindustan Lever, for a long time they believed that for making detergents you needed a spray dryer. So whereas Nirma came and made detergents without any spray dryer. So this is a problem in companies. Companies suffer from what built success in the first place. That prevents change.
Yeah.
We will go for another, we'll go to 7:45 or 8 if necessary. What do you want to do? You want to open it out?
We can open the questions to the audience as well, because I see a lot of questions in the chat. Maybe Group Captain, do you want to take the questions?
So we picked up a couple of them. I also got lots of questions from the YouTube and then on WhatsApp. Maybe in next 5-10 minutes we'll go through the public question, then again go for conversation. So is it okay, Mr. Balraman?
No, I think, some of the questions, maybe some of the other panelists can also answer. It doesn't have to be me.
Yes, I leave it to the general. There's a question from Mr. Samir. He says, in this world of social media, consumers can get in touch with brand managers and even the CEOs and give some very harsh feedback. How should brand managers manage this environment, especially during these crisis times?
This is the reality of today. You get instant feedback. At the same time, I think if there is a genuine problem, you need to immediately address that. There's no doubt about it. But you will have a lot of comments which are coming from people for the sake of comments as well. I think if you are clear that what you're doing is right, it is possible to do. Actually, I think if you really have a great relationship with your consumers, actually, I think your consumers might come to your support and actually point out if it is a wrong feedback. But most likely, if it is a genuine feedback, I guess you have to do something about it. Deepika, do you want to add anything I'm sure you faced some stuff at Pepsi.
Absolutely. And you're right. And, when you're in groups and people see you as individuals, they also know you as representing the company. I think specifically they do reach out to you. I think the only thing to do is, of course, have a very clear protocol. As you said, Kannan, you must respond. There's no option but not to respond. I think the best thing to do is to very politely request the consumer. And, even if you have the best relationship, particularly in FMCG, given the millions of transactions that you do, there is bound to be a slip up, right? There is bound to be that quality defect. There's something that will come up, So it could be 3 incidents in 1,000, but it'll come up, or in 1 million. But those 3 consumers have access to social media. So I think the thing to do is to just take it offline and but respond to your point, and respond and follow through and ensure that that.
I think in general, I think most consumers are fair to the brands. They don't, I think, make crazy demands of brands. So if it is, maybe they are genuinely right about the problem, and you have to address that. I don't think you can hide behind that.
Yeah, most consumers are absolutely, they're very fair, and yeah, but there are, of course,
they're more than fair. I think they give the brands a lot of room. I think brands don't deserve that kind of room that sometimes they get from consumers.
This is a very heretical view now.
There's always this emotional thing, Kannan. When you love a brand, you are not that harsh on the brand.
No, Mr. Balram, this is the whole thing. Unfortunately, you have to be an insider and an outsider. You have to have that distance to make sure that, I mean, it's like, if you're complaining about the country, it's not because you hate the country. You're so much in love with the country that you also want to address the flaws that you can see. If you can't see the flaws within your brand, I think the employee is doing disservice to the brand and the business. This is a challenge I find I struggle with, and I'm grateful for what we could do in Ponch. You could discuss challenges. I think in some companies you can't. Groupthink will just ignore you. And in fact, actually, one of the most valuable quotes, and I still can't figure out, Google Baba has not given me an answer, is how do you belong in a group and yet stand out? Not stand out to show off, but stand out to be able to contradict. I think Nandu in his first talk talked about, right? When you have a problem, you need to make sure that you have a group, and one of the people at least must play a devil's advocate role. Because if the group think is like, oh, there's no problem, you don't even address that. I think you need a role for at least one naysayer, one devil's advocate in the group, so that the group think is challenged. Without that, I think it's doing disservice to the brand by being so much in love with the brand that you can't see the flaws of the brand or the business.
Great insight, sir. There's a question which has come from one of our viewers who are watching listening to audio on our MMA radio. When you think about companies that are customer-centric or even customer-obsessed, which one comes to your mind, sir? Amazon, the Ritz, Carlton, Four Seasons, Southwest Airlines, etc. Right? Is it right? But how did they get there? What did they do differently to ensure they always delivered great experience for the customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole story was about being consumer-centric. Like Southwest Airlines, a fabulous brand. I personally experienced that as well. A lot of these high-end hotels have some amazing, policies when it comes to recruitment of their staff. Airlines, some of these airlines. In fact, I want to give you an example and hijack this conversation. When we were looking at Adidas Singapore, one of the employees that we had at the store was an ex-air hostess at Singapore Airlines. We wanted to bring that kind of experience into retail because these were absolutely consumer-centric, right? And they knew how to handle them. We hired some people who were personal trainers. Personal trainers virtually are on a day-to-day living, right? If you make your customer unhappy, you don't have any more earnings for the rest of the day or and these are all people who are intensely consumer centric in their own mindset and the way they've been trained. And that's how brands have built that. And I think, look at Amazon. I don't think Amazon thinks about profitability. They want to be the greatest consumer business on the planet, period. And they're willing to go to any extent. I can reel off 2-3 experiences that I've had, and you call the customer service, within a minute, the call is picked up. And then the person thanks you for calling Amazon service. If you had a problem, even if it was packaging issues or delivery issues, they address it immediately. They're empowered too. If you don't empower your call center staff and then you have to put up with this thing in the system which somebody else will approve or disapprove and look at it and pass to another level, it's not going to happen. And that's how organization built that. They build that into their costing, into their margins. And of course, a few consumers will probably try to benefit but that's part of the process. You can't upset 99 of your consumers because one consumer is going to take you for a ride.
We move on to the next question. Mr. Pratyush wants to know, sir, your point on exceeding expectations when resolving problems. Our experience in service is that active and effective resolution deliveries the customers to the higher level of satisfaction than where they were before the problem occurred. What are your thoughts on this in product space?
I mean, absolutely. You want to make sure. I'm not suggesting that you focus totally on customer service. You focus first to make sure that your product or service delivers. But having said that, you do recognize that mistakes will happen. In fact, okay, let me not name names here. I think I don't want to be too negative about some organization. I think some customer service almost makes it a business of how many customers did I deal with. The more I dealt with, the better it is, kind of an attitude. But what is the objective of customer service? Customer service is to get to a stage when problems are prevented. So actually the best organization is where customer service calls are actually coming down and down and down. So you do want to make sure that your product solves most of the problems and your services are designed for the consumer right from the start all the way. And again, organizations like Apple have this intuitive way of allowing consumers to solve their own problems in some ways. And actually, it's a great way to build a relationship with the consumers because consumers know that I don't have to go to customer service to get a problem solved. There are intuitive ways in which I can do it myself. So there are various ways to do that. I hope I've answered your question, but you're absolutely right. I think the idea is to prevent a problem, but most importantly, when a problem happens, and it will happen, even if it's a very, very small percentage, and how you handle that is very critical.
There's a question from Ms. Mallikas. What you want to know, did branding means updated of using technology or any other criteria? As a brand manager or as a branch manager, what difference you seeing from other countries to here in India about brandings? Is there any substantial difference between India and other countries?
Deepika, do you want to take it? You're a current exponent. I haven't been doing brand management for the last 5 years. I can give my gyan, but it might be a general gyan. You're a practitioner. Why don't you go ahead? Try that.
No, I'm just trying to understand the
if
question.
You're okay with that, yeah.
I'll repeat the question again, madam. Did branding means updated of using technology or any other criteria? As a branch manager, what difference you are seeing from other countries to here in India about branding? How do we, do you see any development of putting the brand different perspective in India vis-a-vis other countries actually?
Okay. No, I think a brand is a brand, a brand is basically, we know the definition of the brand, but to that extent, whether it's globally in, any country or in India, it's all about, a product or a service which has a unique place in your mind. Mr. Modi is a brand, whether you like it or not, like him or not. Our country is a brand. So to that extent, no, I don't think there are any big differences. And if you're saying is the advent of technology changing the interactions with the brand, then yes. And I think Kannan touched upon a very good point a little earlier to say that I think consumers increasingly are questioning the relevance of brands. So to that extent, I think there is a very dramatic shift in, earlier, I think in India, and I think this is somewhere where India lags global markets a bit. So I think global markets like Germany, etc., got there, I think 10 years ago. India is getting there where, we were still very blindly admiring of our brands. Brands were some things that you aspire to, particularly if they were foreign brands or very trusted, even Indian brands, which had been around for hundreds of years. But now I think consumers are increasingly questioning brands. They're expecting brands to, anticipate and meet their expectations, to have a two-way conversation with them, to constantly, build trust. And I think, technology therefore plays that role of providing instant access both ways with brands. And I think that's the big difference, I would say. And therefore, brands need to be constantly, and I think, again, Kannan made a great point saying, I think the important thing is not just anymore about the product or the offering or the service, but that, ensuring that that relationship with the consumer is evolving with the needs of the consumer. I think is super critical for brands. And I think, Kannan, just to build back to the previous conversation that you were having, and I was really scratching my head to think through what could be some great examples of brands which have offered experiences, absolutely exemplary service in recent times. Honestly, the examples that came to mind in COVID period were my local neighborhood little restaurant, which really went, which really went out of its way, stayed in touch with me, told me that, we're not functional, but, this is my menu card. I can do customizable deliveries to you at home, kept me updated in terms of, recipes, how to, so I think today, the respect for those big brands has gone away. It's really about, having that ongoing relationship and a very equal relationship with the consumer.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether
in general, I think, the customer service and delivery has been outstanding. Almost everybody is stepping up the game, and clearly technology is allowing you to be more on top of the situation than ever before.
We have more than 2,000 viewers watching this program from all our live channels, live YouTube, Facebook. Now there's so many questions that come. I think with Mr. Balraman's permission, shall we take two last questions, sir?
Yeah, two last questions. Yeah.
Yes. There's a question from Mr. Tyagarajan. Kannan, can you talk about the way you have witnessed the brand innovate, launch new technologies in consumer-centric fashions, possibly drawing upon your experience with customized shoes in Adidas, Lumia concept, design in environment, and more? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The one other and that, there are many other ands which are relevant. This whole thing about unique versus mass, or mass versus massification and customization. This is again, obviously if you massify a product and want to bring everything to suit it with one product, you can only so much achieve. Obviously, as brands like Adidas, we have a huge range of products so that different sets of consumers are taken care of by different product categories and different products within that. Obviously, we have lines of sports, technologies, price points. I used to launch almost, 300 models of shoes every 90 days in Singapore. That's the kind of variety that you bring into the market. At the same time, in 2003, we launched a program called My Adidas, a mass customization program. Very few countries in the world took that because they were largely selling through the customers, and no customer wants to spend so much time and effort, right? So we launched My Adidas in Singapore in 2003, if I recall. It was a 45-minute, by appointment, this thing where you could come, you get your feet measured. If your left foot is wider than your right foot, you could get two different sizes. So that fit was always very important for Adidas. And then on top of, because we were a performance brand and we were a German brand to boot, so we had to really deliver that. On top of it, you could customize by saying, I want a sole in this color, this piece in this color, and that piece in that color. And then lo and behold, your order goes directly to the factory the same moment online. And then 21 days later, you get your personalized customized shoe with your own autograph or your dog's name or your daughter's name or your son's name, whatever you wanted to. And all we could do was like one shoe every 45 minutes. In a day, you're probably doing about 10, 15 shoes. Not a big business, but when you are doing that and your competitor Nike is not able to do that right in front of your store. We actually put up a store right in front of the Nike store, a slightly bigger store, also doing the customization. It was a small quantity, but in business, I think what you do with a small set of consumers or a small capability determines what you sell elsewhere. This technology allows you to convince consumers who will never buy that technology at that 50% premium, but they end up buying that whole thing. I also make a joke about yellow shoes. Sometimes we range some crazy colors like yellow color and orange color. Today, of course, it's become mass. Everybody wears a yellow color and orange shoe. But those days they wouldn't. But when you showed a yellow shoe or an orange shoe, consumers got attracted to that and looked at it. And then they would look at it and say, okay, I'll buy the black that I can pull off. I can't pull off the. So, I mean, I think in your portfolio management, you need to do what is, getting the consumer to notice you, what is giving the image for the brand. Unfortunately, not always possible when you have, a one product company, or at best you have sizes and perfumes and stuff like that. But in Adidas, we could do a lot of that part.
One last question come from the YouTube, Mr. Gurudev. You want to know, how can we make our new product development more customer centric by starting from target customers perspective? And what can my company and my brand do to add value to customers' lives during this crisis?
Great question. I mean, I think this is absolutely critical that you involve the consumers right at the beginning. Quite often we do a whole lot of product development, and I spend a lot of time with startups. And some of these people are fantastic technologists, fantastic innovators, but they start with their idea of what it should be. In some cases, you get a hit, but very rarely it is a consistent hit. I think the best way to develop any concept or product is to do the so-called fast fail method of innovation, right? You churn a concept, unfortunately, the consumers can't tell you or give you feedback about products without something concrete. So you're constantly iteratively developing products and concepts and taking back to the consumers. And I think, like what I mentioned earlier, and Vivek also reinforced, you should know who your consumer is. I give a silly example sometimes. We all know white comes from Vibgyor, right? Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange. And if my favorite is violet and Mr. Balraman's is indigo and Vivek's is blue, and we give white to everybody because white has all these colors, right? Or if you take an average score of some concept and say this average is higher than that, I would rather have a concept which appeals to a big chunk of the consumers with a rating of 4 or 5. And I don't mind if some consumers have no interest in that concept of product. This is about connecting with your core audience, being very clear who that audience is, whether you can make a profitable business out of it, and doing that very well. This wishy-washy averages don't work in brands, even in businesses, I strongly believe, but definitely more so in brands.
Yes, Mr. Balraman.
Okay. What an extraordinarily nice session. Do we make more profit, or do we increase sales volume? Do we go for very high volumes, or do we go for volume that gives you profit? Do we orient ourselves to the consumer or to society? So, Kannan, you are totally right. We do have this various questions coming up at different points of time. So business is all about making good judgment. And I want to thank Shyam. I want to thank this lovely lady from Diageo, Deepika Warrior, and Vivek, the Grey salesman from Dreamfloor Talk. Kannan, you talked about your brief experiment about mass customization in Adidas, where if the left foot is size 8 and the right foot is size 7, you do it. And you also talked of different colors, red, green, orange, yellow, and all. The other day I met someone who was wearing yellow socks on one leg and red socks in another.
Very fashionable nowadays.
And I I pointed that out to him, and he said, "Sir, do you know something? I have exactly a similar pair at home, another one."
Yeah, so they buy 2 pairs of socks and wear one from one pair and one from the other. It's very fashionable nowadays.
So that is what, Kannan, you have done from Adidas. You have made us all mad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Balraman. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the audience. And thank you, Group Captain. Thank you all for taking time on a Saturday evening. I think this whole session made me think a lot about my 30 years of work. Thanks for indulging in a little bit of nostalgia as well. Thank you. Have a great evening and a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks once again to Madam Deepika, Vivek, and Mr. Shyam. And thank you all the viewers, 2000 plus. In fact, any of your friends, colleagues missed this great evening. It's all recording is available in our Facebook, YouTube, and our website. Please pass on this message so that the knowledge is shared, what you learned this evening. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, Saturday Night Fever, only when we had one hero, John Travolta. Now, every week we are presenting different heroes and come to talk to you about the fragrance of business. Till we meet again next week, we are going to have another fantastic session. Thanks, Mr. Balraman, for thing. And we have a small feedback session, questions. If we take just 30 seconds just to fill up this question, because your feedback is very important to us. Thank you so much. We appreciate really your support and your understanding. Thanks. Until we meet again, bye-bye. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.